Hello guys, welcome back to another video. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the iPad 3rd Gen and answering the question, should you buy one of these today or should you avoid it? And let me tell you a brief history about it. So the iPad 3rd Gen came out in March 2012. So today, this device is 10 years old. I got this one in February of 2013 on my birthday. So I was the first owner of this iPad. Of course I didn't buy it, but I was the first owner. I didn't buy this thing used on eBay. So I used it for a couple of, I believe 2 years. So until 2015, before I lost it. Actually we moved houses, so it's probably lost in my old house somewhere. Until I found it 2 years later and decided, since I didn't have an iPad at that time, this was my last iPad actually, after which I didn't have an iPad for like 2 to 3 years. But anyway, once I found this thing, somehow, I decided, I don't have an iPad, even though this thing was, what, 4 or 5 years old at that time, why don't I use it? So I bought, one of these 30-pin cables on Amazon, which we didn't have at that time anymore because Apple switched to Lightning. And I booted this thing up. It charged, it worked, I set it up on my Apple ID account, it was fine. Until in 2019, I got my iPad Pro 11-inch, which after, this iPad was again retired. Until I gave one of these to my cousin 2 to 3 years later. And he got a new iPad, so he gave this thing back to me. So now, today, I am just using it as a bedtime alarm clock. Literally, it just sits on my bed shelf and I use it as an alarm clock and it does that job perfectly fine. But anyway, I'm going to be answering the question, should you buy one of these if you're someone who wants an iPad for a very low budget for simple use? So let's first of all start talking about the design. This iPad has Apple's old iPad design language. So basically this design was really used until the iPad 4, which after Apple unveiled the iPad Air, which had an all new design language. Obviously to this day this design is outdated. I mean, it has huge bezels, fat bezels. It has the home button, so it's an old design, but it's still a good design. Apple products always looked good, whether they're old or not. Apple always has nice designs, and this one's no exception. You could get this iPad in black or white. I have the black one. And this was Apple's first iPad with cellular connectivity, so you could throw in a SIM tray here and use it with cellular connectivity, although I'm not sure if it works. I'm not sure if modern cars support this iPad. This iPad was also the first iPad to introduce 32 and 64 gigabytes storage options on top of 16 gigabytes, like we had with its predecessor. This was also the last iPad Apple made with the 30-pin connector, after which it was replaced with the iPad 4 with its Lightning connector. So yeah, this has some history in it, I guess. Features that modern iPads don't have compared to this is a mute switch, remember the mute switch? This one's broken, so it doesn't do anything. And a headphone jack. Apple removed the headphone jack from modern iPads, so this has, something to like in it, I guess. This design, obviously it's not attractive, but it's still a good design in the way, if you look at it, for example, you appreciate how actually thin it is. And considering this thing is 10 years old today, it still looks quite good. Like Apple designs, as I said, are always good looking. They always design the products well. This one's no exception. Let's talk about the display. So one of the technologies Apple implemented for the 3rd generation iPad is its Retina display, which we still have to this day, obviously improved a lot and more advanced. But comparing this display to its predecessor, the iPad 2nd gen, this has a resolution of 2048 by 1536. Compare that to its predecessor, which didn't have a Retina display, that has 1024 by 768 pixels. So that tells you like a huge difference in the size of pixels, and they have the same size displays, 9.7 inches. So the Retina display was obviously a lot sharper, and 2012 was in fact the year when Apple introduced the Retina MacBook Pros. So they implemented that technology into the iPads. And I mean, looking at this display today, if you look closely, you can see pixels. Obviously, over the years, the Retina display has become more sharper, more advanced. But considering this thing is 10 years old, it still has a pretty good display. You know, it goes up to the brightness of 500 nits, which is quite bright, even to today's standards. Now, this has a 60 Hz display, so no 120 Hz. It's a simple display for simple people. Let's talk about the processor. So, this again was the first time Apple introduced a dual-core processor into an iPad. It's an A5X dual-core processor, which meant more power, yet more efficiency. Today, obviously, this processor is not cutting it. If, like, for simple tasks like web browsing, it just won't cut it. You launch Safari, you launch a web page, it will at least take 5 seconds for it to load. Not only with Safari, but for example, launching Maps takes also a bit of time for it to load, and that could be the processor slowing it down. But still, for a 10-year-old device, it's doable. It's still usable. Let's talk about the OS on this iPad. So this has, the latest you can install on this is iOS 9.3.6. iOS 9 is a pretty nice, simple OS. You have Control Center like we have today. You have Spotlight Search. On this iPad particularly, I have 64 gigabytes of storage, but I don't have any applications installed. I reckon this iPad can probably do simple tasks with simple games. For example, you can play like games like Tetris or 2048, but you won't be able to do anything much harder than that. Heck, even YouTube, you can't download YouTube anymore on iOS 9. But for people who are buying one of these and for their use case scenarios, this iOS 9 is more than what they need. And one thing I like about iOS 9, which we don't get in modern iOS, is listen to this. That old Apple, click, when you switch it off, the device. Which obviously with iOS, I believe 11 or 10, they changed it to a more neutral one. I prefer how the old one sounds. It's just a satisfying sound. But yeah, the iOS 9 Apple devices, but one thing I can tell you, Apple devices, the good thing about them is they're made to last. This is a 10-year-old device, and if you have like an Android equivalent, a 10-year-old Android tablet, it wouldn't be nearly as good as enough as this iPad is, considering this thing's age. I can still watch YouTube on this thing. Obviously, I have to do it for Safari, but I can do it, And considering, of course, it's not the smoothest, but considering its age. So you gotta give credibility to that for Apple for that. Now let's talk about battery life. I cannot talk about any testing because I don't use this device, but this iPad has a 42.5 watt-hour battery pack, which at the time Apple said has 10 hours of playback time. Now, if you're gonna buy this thing, it's most likely you're gonna buy one refurbished. You won't be able to buy a new one, obviously, because they don't produce these anymore. But if you are gonna buy an unboxed one, one which is sealed, which was never opened, it's still gonna have battery degraded, even though it was never turned on. Over the years, the battery will have been degraded. So if you're gonna buy one of these, you might have to replace the battery for a fresh one. But I'm not even sure if you're gonna be able to, because I don't know if they produce the battery pack for this model. Now let me answer the question, should you buy this thing today? If you're in the market for an iPad for simple uses and you have a very low budget, should you buy one of these? And my answer to that question is, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it. So yes, this iPad can still be used today for simple uses, like as I explained, watching YouTube videos, web pages, browsing internet. However, it's not going to be the smoothest experience. It is, as I said, quite slow. The processor is obviously not keeping up to date anymore. So For the price of one of these, 60 to 70 pounds, you can find iPad Airs, iPad Air 2, which are way more modern, have way more modern design, have way more modern processor, and etc, which will probably be better. It's not the best choice out there. You can find something better for that price range. And even then, I don't think people are going to be buying these. Nobody buys these for using it. People might want to buy these as a collectible item. And that's exactly what I'm doing. You know, people might be asking me, why am I not keeping this garbage here? Why don't I throw it away? And because I want to keep it as a collectible item. You know, this was my second iPad, but I was the first owner of it. And this iPad this year is 10 years old. It's 10th anniversary. So obviously I'm not going to be throwing it away. It's going to be my collectible item. Obviously, and I'm not going to be planning selling this since it's in very bad condition. And if I am going to put it up for sale, it will probably go for about 10 to 20 pounds. If you're in the market for an iPad, skip this one. Find something more modern, more newer. I'm pretty sure you'll be able to find a more modern iPad for that price range. Maybe you're going to have to pay 10, 20 pounds more, but at least you're getting a way more modern tablet. This thing, like with the iPhone 6 video, is a collectible item. And really, I don't think people who are going to be buying these are going to use these. They're just going to use them for very light use or just keep it as a collectible item. But anyways guys, let me know in the comments, do you have old devices like these? What do you do with them? Do you use them or do you keep it as a collectible item? Thanks for watching guys. I'll see you again in the next video.